Hello everyone, you're all very welcome to this week's Inspiring Ideas at Trinity webinar. My name is Colin O'Halloran and I work in Alumni Relations at Trinity Development and Alumni. This afternoon we're delighted to welcome Andrea Bandelli, Acting Director of Science Gallery Dublin, and Linda Doyle, Dean of Research at Trinity College. They'll be discussing how the Science Gallery adapted to a new style of showcasing and exhibiting, as well as how Trinity College adapted its research in the face of COVID-19. We also have Ian Brunswick, Head of Strategic Academic Engagement at Science Gallery Dublin, joining us to facilitate the discussion and Q&A following the main talk. Now, before we begin, I'd just like to go through a few things for those of you who are watching on Zoom. If you would like to watch in full screen, you can click in the top right corner. If you would like to adjust your audio settings, you can click in the bottom left corner. If you need to leave the session at any stage, you can click on the Leave Meeting button at the bottom right-hand corner. And I really would encourage you to ask questions and engage with this webinar. You can click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen there and type in your question, and our speakers will endeavour to answer your questions later on. For those of you who are watching on YouTube Live, if you would like to view in full screen, or if you would need to mute or unmute the video, you can do so using the small speaker button circled here in red. To share the webinar, you can click on the share link button on the right, and to subscribe to our YouTube channel, click on the red button saying subscribe. Again, we'd love to hear from you. So if you have any thoughts, comments, or questions, please type them into the live chat box on YouTube and we'll transfer them over to our speakers. Now, our speakers today are Andrea Bandelli, Linda Doyle, and Ian Brunswick. There will be a discussion which will last around 30-35 minutes, followed by around 15 minutes of Q&A. So we should take just under an hour and finish up by 2 p.m. Irish time. This webinar is being recorded for later viewing. So if you are watching on Zoom, you will get a link to the recording shortly. The recording will also be available to view on the TCD Alumni YouTube channel. Now, I'd like to introduce Ian Brunswick, who will further introduce today's speakers. Ian is Head of Strategic Academic Engagement at Science Gallery Dublin, and spent the last year on sabbatical as a curator at the Smithsonian Institution. He joined Science Gallery in 2010, originally leading the events program and subsequently holding positions including exhibitions and event manager, head of programming, and acting director. He has overseen partnerships with diverse collaborators, including University of Cambridge, Museum of Modern Art in New York, the HRB, and the Wellcome Trust. So I'll hand you over now to Ian.
Thanks, Colin. That was a great intro. It's a real pleasure to be hosting this, and to everybody, if you're just starting now, fire your questions in, and I'll field them to our speakers towards the end. So just to do a brief introduction of who we'll be talking to today, Linda Doyle, as Colin said, is the Dean of Research at Trinity College Dublin, and she's the first professor of engineering and the arts, a wonderful title. Her expertise is in the fields of wireless communications, cognitive radio, reconfigurable networks, spectrum management, and creative arts practice. And I know at Science Gallery, we've worked with a lot of young artists and digital creatives who have worked with Linda and her Connect and CTVR initiatives. She's a fellow at Trinity, and she was director of Connect and its precursor, CTVR, and she's raised over 70 million euro in research funding over the last decade and published widely in her field. She's on the board of a bunch of things. Linda said that she estimates around 50 boards and committees, but those span everything from the National Broadband Steering Committee to the Festival of Curiosity, the Douglas Hyde, and Science Gallery Dublin. And I even roped her into giving a TEDx talk to about 2,000 people a few years ago, and she brought the house down. So thank you so much for joining us, Linda. And our other speaker is Andrea Bandelli. So Andrea is the chief diplomat of Science Gallery International, which he'll tell us more about. He's responsible for the explosive growth and the expansive vision of the Science Gallery network, which now has many locations all over the world. He's a keen listener and a world citizen by trade, and his academic background includes an MA in economics, a master's in science communication, and a PhD in social sciences, with a specialization in scientific citizenship. He's also a member of the expert network at the World Economic Forum. He's on the board of the Deutsches Museum in Munich, and his 25-year career spans places public and private organizations, including science museums, government organizations, universities across Europe, USA, South Africa, and Brazil. and he's led on some of the most innovative projects on science, art, democracy, and public participation, which has brought him now to Science Gallery International and more recently Science Gallery Dublin. I want to say welcome to both of you for this discussion on cultural innovation. It's great to see you guys, even though we're all separated, but I think that gives us an amazing context in which to discuss the challenges and opportunities this presents. And without further ado, maybe let's kick off with Andrea, a brief presentation you have on how Science Gallery has adapted to the new normal and found a new way of sharing activities and research.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Ian, and welcome everyone. Welcome, Linda. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and it's a real treat. Science Gallery, indeed. I just have a few slides to set the scene of what we are talking about, and also to give a very brief introduction to Science Gallery for those of you who maybe haven't been there or haven't seen Science Gallery. Science Gallery is at Trinity College Dublin, has been there since 2008, and it's a landmark actually on the fringe of the campus that connects the university with the city. This is the view from outside, from the street. This is what you look into, and it's a place where art and science collide. So what we pride ourselves is in conversations that bring together researchers, artists, designers, students, and the public. This is actually my favorite image. This is the artwork is called Memory of a Brain Malformation. It is a laser etching into a piece of glass that represents a tumor cell in the brain, which was removed with a laser. So it's the technology that is used both to remove the tumor and to create the artwork. But actually here you see indeed a member of the public, maybe a student that actually explains what this artwork is to the mediators, the young students who work in Science Gallery. So you have this circle of conversations. And just to give you a very a quick glimpse of the stuff that we've shown in Science Gallery, it's pretty funky things, but this was a VR system for a chicken called Second Livestock by Austin Stewart. It's a system for chickens to let them believe they roam free. Maybe it's the same way we use virtual reality. This is a project called Stranger Vision by Ethel Dewey-Hagborg. She's a biohacker, and she creates these masks based on the DNA she extracts from cigarette butts and chewing gum from the street. So it is a very stark representation of the privacy and the loss of identity, in a sense of the fact that we leave our identity behind everywhere we go, and therefore it's possible to recreate these masks. So these are indeed, we're showing in 12 years thousands of artworks. As Ian said, Science Gallery is a network, so there are 8 actually galleries around the world in London, Dublin, Rotterdam, Venice, Melbourne, Bangalore, Atlanta, and Detroit. They're all based in universities, and they all work indeed on the same principles of bringing art and science together and creating conversations on the most pressing issues today. But coming to the topic of today, this image represents very well what you would have seen in Science Gallery until February. Lots of people, a lot of interaction, a lot of touching, a lot of being close together. So definitely something problematic today. Even more, this, when talking about Science Gallery, I always used to show this picture, which is the cafe in Science Gallery, saying this is actually the heart of Science Gallery. And again, this is something that can't happen today. So when you have a place that is built really on interactions and on proximity and on tangible things like Science Gallery, and then you have indeed social distancing and institutions that are closed, what can you do? So I would say in 24 hours, our team has done something remarkable, completely pivoted the program online. And these are indeed just a few shots of images of what you can see on Instagram, for instance, or on the website. And there are all kind of initiatives that are done online. That's of course, the first thing that you do. You move your program online, and we can talk a little bit of about that. The interesting thing is that we became much more of a magazine rather than a conventional gallery. So and that is reflected also in the way that the website has changed. It becomes really a container of content. And I'll come back because this is a significant shift in terms of what the role of the content plays in an organization like Science Gallery. We started to do a lot of activities for education. Of course, there are a lot of programs and projects going on. This was one of the first on mental health, which is indeed something, of course, absolutely fundamental for our young audiences. And again, what you can see is that suddenly projects and programs that were conventionally done for schools or students become available to everyone and actually become relevant to everyone. And that's another major shift. Because of going digital, you realize how much more relevance actually you can build for your audiences. This was a program we did in April. It's called The Science of Grief. And this was the first actually network production between Trinity College, Michigan State, Emory University. 3 galleries produced 3 hours of content on the topic of grief. Grief indeed is something that touched us very closely during the pandemic. And this was an exploration indeed on loss, on resilience, looking at indeed the science, the work on frontline workers in the health sector. And this was 3 hours of program. And I always say, and we, definitely we can come back about, how do you measure the impact and of these initiatives. There were more than 400 people for 3 hours that watched this program. And I said, we would have never dreamt of having 400 people in a theater in Science Gallery for 3 hours, because our theater actually holds 140 people. So suddenly you have that. And then, we had more than 6,000 people watching the event or parts of in the coming, in the next 24 hours. And again, you have indeed, suddenly you realize that because digital is first, and because this was indeed a program developed for digital, we can reach indeed audiences and work in a way that was completely unexpected and unconceivable before. This is another example. This is a reading group. It is in collaboration with the Trinity Long Room Hub, the Arts and Humanities Research Institute at Trinity. And this is I take this as an example, and of course you can understand there are many others that I could talk to, but just to keep the presentation short. This is a wonderful example because it's led by 2 PhD students, Amalia and Autumn. So it is student-led, and it started in the Café of Science Gallery. It's a gathering for 10 people, and they share the 2 students share an article, and then we read the article and we discuss. Typical, if you want, reading group. Because it is now online, the audience is much larger. It is international, and we get people who would never been able to attend the reading group on site. So it is a very pleasant byproduct, say, of changing online, that students have the opportunity to lead an activity that they could have never dreamt of doing if we were on site. And finally, one of the most remarkable initiatives that we started is called the Rapid Residencies. And again, the history of this project probably shows how impactful it is. Just after the lockdown, we realized a lot of the people we would work with, artists, designers, and the creatives in Dublin, in Ireland, were suddenly without the opportunity to work because of the restrictions in place. So we set aside a little budget to create rapid residencies, basically a little money to work for 5 weeks on an idea in collaboration with the faculty from Trinity College. The project has been so successful, receiving over 180 applications. We were very happy that the provost actually gave additional funding from the Academic Development Fund to fund extra residencies. And we have now 18 groups of designers, creatives indeed, and researchers working together, developing an idea in 5 weeks. And this is indeed of the 18. Forgive me all the participants. I show only one, but this is indeed Valerie Vetter. She does a project on masks, looking at indeed the craft and science of masks. And in 5 weeks, there is a whole website with all this information, all the, looking at the politics, at the science, at the DIY, the makers. It's a fantastic project. And so there are indeed other 17. I'll stop the presentation now, and we can indeed converse. What this initiative show are indeed a couple of things. First, that by being forced to think of digital first, we can dare to do things that we didn't do before. The rapid residency is an example. The collaboration between artists and scientists in this way are like the Holy Grail. Everybody wants to do them, but they are so difficult because also, people are humans, and it's not easy to put together people. So previously, there would have been a lot of constraints. Well, can we do it? And how long? And what can you do? And now you don't have time for all these questions. You just go and do it. And it's such a beautiful thing. And we've seen that the results are fantastic, not only for the participants, but also for indeed the college, for our staff. The staff is mentoring this collaboration. So they learn a lot, things that they, that would be inconceivable before. So this is indeed one thing. The other aspect is also the ability indeed to rethink of our measures of impact. I'll say, we have KPI now that look at different numbers, and we can go into detail later. They stop making sense now. And it's actually really a beautiful thing, because it really forces us to go beyond the numbers and think, okay, what are we really doing? So that's indeed just a short introduction to how we changed programming and the activity of the gallery. And yeah, I'd love now to talk with you, Linda and Ian, and answer the questions from the participants.
So Andrea, a very, very lovely presentation. And as ever, the Science Gallery always has these most beautiful, compelling slides that wants to make you know much more about everything. So, I think everybody listening has undergone that big transformation that you're talking about. So the first thing I suppose I'd like to know is, going forward, when things get back, if they ever do, are you going to keep some of the stuff that you've done now, or how's the Science Gallery going to change? Because I know there are plenty of people out there who absolutely love the touch and feel and being there, and those kind of very, very compelling images you showed at the beginning. So yeah, so what's here to stay, and what'll change back?
Yeah, exactly. So, well, we have to adapt to the current constraints. So we hope that soon all this will be behind us and we can again touch. But until there are health concerns about being close together and touching things, that can't be done. So we'll reopen the gallery. In this summer between July and August. However, being realistic, there will be a limited access to the gallery, simply because we can't have too many people in the same space. So while that will continue, what we want to keep definitely is this mentality of doing things online first, which seems so simple, but actually is really, really difficult, because the fact of having a space available makes you, by default, you do things for the space first and then online. Whereas this is really our chance to think of, let's do things online first, and then the space becomes a secondary way to engage. The other thing is that, we started really a shift from talking about topics, you know, plastic or intimacy or blood, or, you know, the topics that science got, to thinking about issues, and grief. Indeed, the science of grief is an example. We need to be really focused on the opportunities basically for action that our visitors and our community has. So what I would like to keep from this programming is indeed the accent on digital first. This is really an effort that we must continue. And the second one is to be issue based. You know, I'm reading actually interesting articles about scientific literacy, you know, a concept that has been there a lot of, you know, for a lot of time, but what you see today is that you have the literacy about learning science and technology, and about science and technology, and doing then the science, but then you have more and more the action, the social civic action as part of scientific literacy. And I think that's a really, really beautiful concept. Actually, I would like to know what you think about that in a little while, but and that you can stimulate that if you talk about issues rather than topics. So contextualizing really what we do. So that's what we are going to keep.
Are you saying, and I think this is maybe what I'm hearing, are you saying that the focus on the physical space made you think first and foremost about maybe the spectacle of the exhibition, and that moving away from the physical space is making you think more about the issues, which I actually think it's fantastic that the issues are coming to the fore. But in one sense, it's kind of very stark to think how I suppose confined we are by the spaces in which we occupy, and how it limits our thinking. So that's what I hear you say. Am I
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, these are also conversations that I'm hearing more and more from other sectors as well. You know, think theater. We think of theater as a building. Yeah. Theater actually is people performing with the audience, and because of the building, we kind of forget almost that there is that performative action of and the same is with the exhibition. The exhibition actually is about the interactions that happen there. It's about the work of developing, of producing that content. You know, the rapid residencies for me is as an exhibition, as indeed bringing objects in a space, and that's the power of creating collaborative activities like this one.
Can I push back on that a little bit as well, just asking you? So I get a great sense of passion from you, okay? And the kind of engagement and passion that I feel you're transmitting keeps me interested in the conversation. And I ask myself, you know, especially I suppose, and I think lots of people are feeling this when you spend all your days on Zoom, do you think that even performance piece, or that kind of that passion and that feeling can continue to be transmitted digitally the way that you're able to do it on the ground through the people that help out in the gallery, and the fact that they can kind of just respond on a very, very even one-to-one basis to the visitor?
Yeah, definitely. If, however, we change our approach from not considering the online as the second best, but as the first best. I always think to do this, I always think, you know, in 10 years or maybe 5 years, it would be really wonderful to look back at this moment and say how silly we are looking now through Zoom doing these kind of things. And having today that perception of in a sense the silly, because this is a kind of a second best option, right? We use a camera through a screen to communicate. That's not really, in a sense, it's wonderful that it works. You know, but it's if you think, you know, it's not really well thought out. It would be wonderful to have an opportunity where we can actually share, for instance, much more than this, you know, small image that we are sharing now. And I'm pretty sure that, you know, in 5 years we'll be able to do that. But the power of a place like Science Gallery and the power of indeed research and creatives is that today, even though we are constrained by this format, we can start to think of the limits. And the limits, in fact, are a wonderful way to stimulate creativity. So yes, of course, you know, the digital at the moment is limiting the interaction that we were used to, because we can't, but it's because of these limits that we can be creative and create that kind of leap forward.
Can I unpack a couple of things there in that? So first of all, I just want to talk a little bit about inclusion and access. And I come from a networking background, as you know, and as Ian was saying, and one of the things that actually we've seen, and I've seen this, the stats I saw from Ofcom in the UK as well, that networks have held up well. Now, there's a big digital divide problem, and maybe we come back to that in a second, but they've actually held up well in terms of inclusion in this, and in terms of functionality. But I do think there is a whole piece around access and inclusion, and one of the things that's really hit us all, I'm sure, is the fact that it's not just whether you have the connection or not, it's whether you can sit in a room on your own and concentrate, and it's the space on the other side. So space matters. even if now we're speaking to each other digitally, it matters that I'm here unperturbed, and the person cutting the grass a minute ago has stopped, and I can talk to you. So so in terms of inclusion and access, on the one hand, you're getting many other audiences, but do you think you're going to be cutting out certain audiences that the gallery would have otherwise reached out to by this digital first approach?
I don't know, to be honest. I agree with you that it's very simple just to say because we go online, we get more or larger audiences. Yes and no, indeed, there are a lot of limitations there. There are also a lot of limitations in the physical space. A space in central, not only in terms of access, central Dublin within the university, but also in terms of how it looks like. There are people who still don't feel comfortable going to the center of the city. So I wonder, indeed, we are shifting probably the conversation about access. Certainly, what is very intriguing is that and this is probably a much larger conversation, and I don't know if we can give it justice in a few minutes, but it's about when we ask our audience to participate, we are asking a lot. In the sense that it's not only the participation for the enjoyment and the of a piece of art or a research process. So we are actually asking a civic role to the audience. And I wonder, at the moment, that is either an individual role. It's for my own benefit, for my own enjoyment that I do that. But more and more we do that because that is indeed what performance, what art and culture is going to be participatory. And I think, should we be part of redefining the kind of social contract that we have with citizens? That's why it's a very big conversation, I know. But really it is asking, and it's not only about, can we ask these things for free and what is the, but it's much deeper. It is not a ancillary activity participating in culture. It is a fundamental part of being a citizen.
I would agree, and I mean, I think that so we're finding on the research side, for example, that participation and access has really changed with this, and obviously there are people whose research lives are totally disrupted because they can't get into the labs that they need to get into, or they can't access the manuscripts that they actually do need to physically touch. Then we find on the other hand, some people are freer to think, and then we also find other trends, and I don't know whether you see them or can judge by your audiences at the moment, but there are some worrying trends where we're reading things, and we see papers emerging now where people with childcare duties are not getting to submit as many papers as they did before, and you see kind of gendered roles coming back to play. So it's a really funny space of where you're kind of going into the future and taking steps backwards at the same time. I don't know whether you guys noticed anything like that with your audiences, or the kind of who's participating and how that's changed.
Right. Well, at the moment, indeed, we notice indeed an increase in audiences, especially online audiences. We haven't looked yet. We don't have often that level of granular detail in terms of even gender, age or so, because they are still behind, say, the online screen rather than
on the internet. Nobody knows you're a dog. Remember that?
Exactly. So, but no, definitely that is, and that is definitely true. And I hope indeed, going forward, that we take this conversation seriously. I mean, we see that, also in the past months and weeks, it's not only, the coronavirus that is shaping society, but also how we think about inclusion and race. And so that's a very, very strong signal there in terms of, hey, things are really starting to change in a systemic way.
I think that's really important. And I think it's really important for us to maybe have a little bit of discussion about the art, the part of the art in this. So I know that you're very interested in kind of redefining the narrative around numbers as well, and the kind of scientific narrative. And I mean, despite being an engineer, I do believe all evidence is socially constructed. I think the way we talk about things, the words we use, as you say, is so much to the fore at the moment, and how you actually signal your kind of political intent and interests, but also how you use numbers. And I think one of the things that I think has been both good and bad, and I just want to, so in the research world, we are constantly asked what's research for, and we have to kind of justify it all of the time, and that's fine because taxpayers' money does go into it. But COVID-19 has been a point in time where people are beginning to even more widely understand the value and importance of research. Not that all research needs to have a defined utility, but they really, really see that. And the other thing that's coming back is kind of the voice of the expert. We've kind of gone to a space where it was all about the the soundbite, and I think the voice of the experts coming back. But where I see things kind of more complex is where you hear politicians talking about, I am following the science on that. So I think there's complexity in two ways. There's complexity in understanding the science, and there's complexity in understanding that science informs, and then it's a political decision after that, and understanding where that breaks and starts. And I suppose I'm really interested in your comments and your thoughts about the role of the artist in all of that process.
Yes, yeah, no, exactly. Well, definitely, listening to the science is absolutely necessary. It is important to have knowledge systems, and art is a knowledge system. So it is really to give us the insights that those speculative kind of insights that push us beyond the boundaries of science, because also it's the role of science to say we know until here, and then we don't know what is after that. But many times you need to take decisions that are based on the beyond, and indeed art and culture are really a very powerful way to complement, say, that knowledge system. It is also a lot of what we see today is also based on the emotional response that we have to what happens. And yes, there are ways to measure and to assess and to study the emotional response, but there are also areas where again, art is the role of art to inform us and to give us the kind of insights that are necessary to inform those decisions. So that, I think, it is what we need. Also, in terms of, I would say, art is also the one that keep us sane, in a sense, especially at times of uncertainty and profound stresses as we're having now. It is really the role of art to keep us sane, to keep us also to create that kind of solidarity among ourselves that we need. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, I mean, you're speaking to the converted here in the role that the science and the art should play together.
Yeah, and on the numbers, actually, there's the arts also kind of suffer, if you want, from a absolutely legitimate demand, to justify impact, and therefore numbers saying, so many people came to see an exhibition is a very clear and rational way to demonstrate a certain impact. However, when I used to work in museums, I said, if you drop dead after coming into the museum, you still count as a visitor. And in the sense that, those numbers don't tell us actually anything or very little about what happens with it. So while those numbers actually may go down in terms of physical, what we have now an incredible opportunity to really study and do research about what happens with the encounters between visitors and the art. And I think, that's also something that in Science Gallery we should take advantage of the situation now, because we have the space. Yeah.
That is very important anyway, because what you find happening in the research world at the moment. So some of the listeners might be familiar with the phrase open science or open scholarship. And part of that is just about making material open. But there's a huge part of that movement that is about understanding what happens to your research. So it's about moving away from this notion of the pure numbers. So in our case, the numbers are, I published in this really important journal or this very important press. So it's about moving away from that to saying this piece of work has this life, and this piece of work went on to influence or inform or change, or these people engaged with this piece of work in a particular way. So and in fact, that can be quite a scary thing for people, because the numbers that we tend to use are numbers that are kind of born out of kind of a certain level of prestige and kudos and understanding, whether it's visitor numbers or whether it's or whether it's the numbers in the world I come from, and essentially to push that to something that's much more about understanding the engagement and the interaction with is just so important.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I definitely, and that those indeed that larger societal impact is something that Science Gallery has been done for many years with different collaborations with researchers, and now actually because we have more time and space available, actually we can do so much more there. And I think that's an opportunity that we have in front of us, which we should definitely make use
Ian
of.
has popped up, which means he's going to,
yes.
rope us in, or roll us in, I should say.
No. I want to chime in. I want to ask you guys a question, because this is super interesting. So just I want to throw a question to both of you, kind of what you're talking about there, and this change in the medium of interaction and the rapid adaptation going on in the cultural outreach, the STEM engagement sphere. It makes me think a little bit about if you've ever seen a video of a play, you're like, it's good, but it doesn't entirely translate, when you change medium. How do you think that taking things online will not only change where the interaction happens, but will change what the action is? Because Andrea, some of the projects you talked about at the beginning were pieces which have been created by artists elsewhere that Science Gallery got a chance to feature to a new audience. But towards the end, the rapid residencies, those are completely novel collaborations. That's much more commissioning, curating, original kind of almost interdisciplinary R&D process. So it's different than the spectacle. So how do you think this adaptation to a different medium might affect the actual action or the core production of what happens at Science Gallery?
I would say, the fact that the space is very limited and the concept of exhibition is really very limited is a fantastic constraint. And we should really be very bold in saying, you're not transferring your work online. You really need to think about a broader way to engage with your audience that includes also digital means. And it's not to say dance and theater and more traditional forms of culture and art are dead. Absolutely not. But it is indeed just like technology changed the way of making art and music. Think of music. The technology of musical instruments allow for the creation of new forms of music. So indeed, in many other realms, being strict about it is not a secondary thought, the digital. It is really embedded since the beginning, which for many artists also it is, I think, a great challenge to take.
In lots of cases, it's not just a case of throwing something up and it being there online. I do think there is an amount interactive design. And by that, I don't necessarily mean expense, because I think one of the greatest things about kind of social media movements is that you can actually, in a much more rough and ready way that's acceptable, create content. Whereas like years ago, if we had to move online overnight for teaching in Trinity, and years ago, that would have been a huge production. Whereas now you can just use kind of readily available tools. However, I think design needs to come into both what you produce and how people consume it. So one of my brothers is a secondary school teacher, and he was saying to me that, you know, just because he says lots of the kids he teaches do not know how to learn online, and they've never gotten any instruction on that. And we kind of confuse sometimes, because they're online all day playing games or doing whatever, that being online is automatic. So I do think there's a piece of work that needs to be done more in terms of the type of content you choose, the way you use it, and also how people receive that on the other end. And there has to be better ways than we do now as well, I think.
Oh, okay, and another thing I want to ask before we go to some of the questions that have come in, because you guys have touched on this about advocacy, activism, social purpose, you know, engaging with politics, as you said, the political implementation of scientific advice. You know, in the intervening time between starting the discussion about this webinar and us having it, the explosion of Black Lives Matter, the anti-racism movement around the world, this has the groundswell behind that has perhaps accelerated discussions about how institutions like Science Gallery and Trinity, and really every institution of every kind, engage with kind of a more bold statement of purpose, social purpose, activism. How do you see places like Science Gallery, Trinity, you know, evolving or responding to this in the coming year or so? Because it's a very significant movement that is happening concurrently with the adaptation to the COVID lockdown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I can tell you the young communities around Science Gallery worldwide, not only, you know, in Dublin, but also indeed in all other locations, were the first one to really demand to Science Gallery to come out and to speak about, you know, and to take action a couple of weeks ago after the first uprising. So you have indeed really a responsibility with your audience first. What I think is that we are getting closer and closer and closer to the moment where really action cannot be deferred, and in a way is also, you know, similar to the conversation we were having before about technology. The institutions, of course, you know, have a certain delay, and which is absolutely important in order to maximize, you know, the impact and the role they can have in society. What we are witnessing now is that we are getting closer and closer to the moment where indeed that action is done. And I've seen, you know, whereas before we could have, you know, having the conversation is enough in a sense. Now it's not enough. And we are having the conversation. That's the first thing indeed we set up. But now we really need to implement changes in terms of, you know, the governance, in terms of the representation in our staff, in our, you know, bodies. So that is a very, you see that, you know, it's a wonderful social phenomenon, but you're getting close to the point where you can't defer action, and I think we are getting there.
And maybe to just comment there just briefly as well, I would agree with that. I do think your point around the conversation, I certainly think that, you know, it would be wrong for me to think with my background or my particular social background that I understand everything that needs to be done. So I think institutions have to be better at asking what is the right way to do this, and listening to what is the right way to do this, and asking the people who know more. So I think that's very, very key. I also think that, going back to a comment that Andrea made earlier about art being kind of a knowledge system, I think for me, one of the really powerful things of doing things in a kind of cultural and art space is that there's a natural kind of understanding or interest in the main. I mean, I know I'm making general statements in power relationships and power imbalance. There's a kind of a really deep understanding of symbol and what's behind symbol, you know, and I don't mean in this kind of superficial level. So I think the frameworks that are here are very good ones to find our way through these kinds of very challenging and issues that absolutely, I agree, need action.
Okay, speaking of listening, I should stop asking my own questions out of my own curiosity and start asking some of the ones that people have put in online. So the top upvoted one is from Susanna. How important do you think Trinity's research output and collaborative approach will be as part of Science Gallery Dublin's future?
Ooh.
Well, we could both. So from my point of view, and this is a very biased opinion, everywhere I look and everything we do, research is part of it. And I suppose you'd say the team of research would say that. And to me, you can see that so fantastically in what I mentioned earlier in COVID-19, that, you know, whether it's to do with the medical sides or the understanding of immunology or social behaviors of our literature representations of COVID-19, research is just everywhere. It matters everywhere. It informs us in every way. And I say that no less in the interaction with Science Gallery. Speaking more specifically, it's both myself and Andrea's plans to knit research, our research interests and the Science Gallery interests together more tightly. And I think there's plenty of opportunity for us to do that in many of the initiatives we're looking at, including initiatives such as some people might have heard here of our E3 Research Institute, where we look you know, at kind of the greatest challenges that face society and kind of bring multidisciplinary endeavours to solve those. So for me, there's potential for tighter coupling, and there's potential for learning on each side of that divide.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can only say, yeah, no, absolutely. You know, when actually, you know, there is one instance that is so nice to mention. I talk about the rapid residencies. When you know, we got the 180 applications from the creatives, and then we sent an email around Trinity to ask for researchers and faculty and, you know, scholars from all disciplines who were interested in working with the artist. And to be honest, at the beginning we thought, well, you know, I know you will laugh now, Linda. Researchers say, well, you know, I'm expert in that area, but not in the one. So, you know, before I commit myself to do something that is slightly outside of my field, you know, the response instead was absolutely, in 20 minutes, we got like 55 researchers and scholars saying, yes, I want to do this. And it just shows indeed the incredible enthusiasm that there is to work indeed collaboratively with Science Gallery. So I can only see, you know, in going forward in the future, a much, you know, tighter integration between research at Trinity, Science Gallery and the public, really to complement the work of all the scholars in the college and create this interface really with the public and then with society.
We've got a question from Sarah. Wonderful to see the innovative approach to COVID-19 challenge by Science Gallery Dublin. Do you envision skills development for docents or researchers and how to communicate about their research and reach new audiences through online platforms?
I definitely, you know, the rapid residencies, again, as I mentioned, it is not only, you know, the production of those ideas, it is upskilling the researchers to work indeed for 5 weeks and hopefully longer with the artist, for the staff, for the students, for the mediators that are involved in that. So if, you know, if we had more resources to do 100 rapid residencies, that's what we would do. So that is indeed you know, we're also discovering new, fast and efficient ways to amplify and to develop new skills for all those involved. So that's, you know, the skills development is a major part of that.
I think there's kind of two sides to that as well. I think what you've seen over the last decade is you've seen researchers in the main learning some of the skills where they're able to say those few sentences that lifts their research up so that people can understand. But primarily, some of that movement has been, you know, the initial part of that movement is so that the media will pay attention to what you do, or so somebody will get it. I think where the Science Gallery comes in is to how can that chat be longer? How can you delve into the details? How can you have that really deep discussion and at the same time have that discussion be understood? And as far as I'm concerned, and I'll use the word technical here, most of the decisions we have to make in our life, if you look at our politicians and you look at the program for government that they're forming now, they're all technical decisions. So whether they're technical about the economy, or whether they're technical about, national broadband, or whether they're technical about how we'll deal with climate change, or whether they're technical about others, people require a technical literacy, and they require a need to go to those deeper levels, if for nothing else, just to question what we're being told. And so I think it's about kind of that deepening, and I think there's plenty of opportunity to build those skills, and doing things like this is also helping.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, thanks guys. Another one from Stephen. Are there possibilities that can be explored by using virtual reality to conduct exhibitions? Or have you guys seen examples of this that you're inspired by, or is this a holy grail of outreach, or what do you think?
I think there's fantastic. I mean, one of the examples we're most proud of in Trinity, some people will have heard of the Beyond 2022 initiative. So that is a virtual reality endeavor by Peter Crooks and the late Che Lawless, where the records office, which was burnt down at the beginning of the Civil War, was recreated virtually. And that records office had 8 centuries of what we would say as part of our identity, our country's identity, on the shelves that disappeared. So part of that initiative is about restocking the shelves virtually and allowing people to go into that space and take things down and learn. And it's also about the kind of power that the fact everything's digitized gives you, and the way you can look at different patterns and trends. So, I mean, you see it happening anyway, where people do that, and where it becomes heavily, really useful. So that's Beyond 2022. If anyone wants to look that up, it's very, very interesting. Just one example of many.
Fantastic. Yeah, I can also say we're on it with the network, and especially Science Gallery Venice, which is indeed based in Venice, where the Biennale has one of the most important VR festivals in the world. They are actually leading a working group throughout the network on virtual reality for exhibitions. And at least one of our rapid residencies actually is looking at virtual reality and brain activity as well. Yeah. So definitely it is, it's where we are going.
And I think the lab of the future, irrespective of whether there's another pandemic or not, we need to be able to remotely engage more for many reasons, including access, including maybe we travel less. So the whole idea that you can actually immerse yourself in another environment and control it, maybe, through augmented as well as virtual reality, I think there's an enormous opportunities in that space. And that also feeds in, I suppose, as I said, to the kind of green agenda of how we live our lives.
Mm-hmm. I'm getting a message that we have to wrap it, but to squeeze one more question in, because Linda, you mentioned the role of the expert and the voice of the expert coming back. Somebody's touched on that, and they said, I think Sheila said, do you think the exposure of science during COVID-19 crisis has increased or decreased society's confidence in science and research?
So I think in a general sense it has increased, because there is an enormous amount of people now who see how research has led to, whether it's a design of a mask, whether it is looking for the vaccines, the way that people, if you hear people talking about, for example, in Oxford and the vaccines, and understanding that clinical trials happen and that there's human trials. So I think there is without a doubt a huge, I suppose, increase in understanding and literacy about research and science. I think where the challenge definitely remains is nothing is beyond manipulation. And there are plenty of politicians around the world who, for whatever reason they want, will say they're following science, and they will pick the bit that they want to, make the point they need to make to direct their population to do what they want them to do. And this goes back to this notion for literacy and the understanding of the numbers and the understanding of the technology. We need to be able to clearly understand, this is where, the informing of the of science stops, and this is where the choices are made. And of course, like in any discipline, there will be also multiple opinions within scientific space.
Okay, wonderful. I've gotten the message that we do have to cut it there. So thank you guys so much. This has been really wonderful, and I'll hand back over to Colin to close this out.
Thanks, Ian. That was a really, really fascinating discussion there. We've had a really fantastic talk this afternoon, but before we go, I'd just like to say a few thank yous and a few final notes. A huge thank you to Andrea, Linda, and Ian for a really thought-provoking webinar. It's really gets you thinking. And also a huge thank you to the team here at Trinity Development and Alumni, who have been working hard behind the scenes, especially to Alex Owens, who has been the technical wizard of this webinar. And also thank you to Niamh O'Doherty, Head of Marketing and Communications at Science Gallery Dublin, for just ensuring that this webinar really got off the ground in the early stages. And last, but certainly not least, thank you to all of yourselves, the audience here. We've had about 150 or so people listening in today. So really thank you for being such a great audience with really engaging questions. If you've enjoyed today's webinar and would like more information, we've shared just 2 websites below. If you'd like more info about Science Gallery Dublin, you can go to dublin.sciencegallery.com. And if you'd like more information about the innovative research happening at Trinity College, you can go to tcd.ie/research/research matters. And finally, if you have any questions or comments regarding the webinar series, please just email us at alumni@tcd.ie. Now, our next webinar in the Inspiring Ideas at Trinity series will be this coming Wednesday, 24th of June at 1 p.m. The webinar is titled The Creative Arts Post-COVID-19 and will feature the Irish film director, Lenny Abrahamson, the Irish film producer and co-founder of Element Pictures, Ed Guiney. And next week's webinar will be facilitated by the Irish economist, journalist and author, David McWilliams. The registration link will be sent out by email later this week, so do keep an eye on your inboxes. It'll be a hot one. So we hope to welcome you next week. In the meantime, thank you once again for joining us and stay safe.